All right, let's talk about a book you definitely know. For centuries, it's been a global bestseller, but lately, the story has been that fewer and fewer people are actually reading it. I mean, the numbers were in a free fall. That is, until now, because some brand new data just came out, and it's telling a completely different and honestly, a pretty surprising story.
Yeah, for years, the story was, well, it was really straightforward. Researchers were watching Bible engagement, and the trend line just kept pointing one way, down. It really looked like a slow, kind of inevitable fade out in our modern culture. And let's put some real numbers to that. Check this out. This data comes from the American Bible Society. Just back in 2021, you had half of all American adults considered Bible users. And that just means they read it, 3 or 4 times a year outside of a church service. But then, look what happened. It drops to 39%, then dips again to 38% by 2024. That's a 12-point drop in just a handful of years. That's huge. But then, something happened. The 2025 data came in, and it showed something literally no one was expecting. A rebound. And we're not talking about a tiny little bump. We're talking about an increase that adds up to about 11 million more Americans reading the Bible than the year before. I mean, after that steady decline, this was a genuine shock, even to the folks who study this stuff for a living. So naturally, this brings up a couple of massive questions, right? First off, why? What's behind this sudden turnaround? And who are these new readers? And then the second question is, what actually happens when someone goes from just, having a Bible on the shelf to really engaging with it? Let's dig into what the data says. So what kind of impact are we really talking about here? Well, researchers have zeroed in on something they call the power of 4. And it turns out hitting a certain frequency of reading isn't just a small thing. It can be genuinely life-altering. Okay, but first, let's be super clear on what we mean. This isn't just about skimming some words on a page. When researchers talk about Bible engagement, they mean a whole process. It's about receiving the word, so reading it or listening to it, then reflecting on what it actually means, and finally, responding to it in your own life. It's an active thing, not passive at all. And this is where it gets really interesting. Researchers found what you could call a behavioral tipping point. They discovered that when people engage with the Bible 4 or more times a week, something significant happens. You start to see these dramatic correlations in their behavior, starting with a major drop in some negative habits. And the scale of this change, it's pretty incredible. For people who hit that 4 or more times a week mark, the odds of them drinking to excess, they drop by 62%. That's a huge number. And this isn't just a one-off finding either. The data shows a really similar pattern across other behaviors. Take this one. The odds of viewing pornography drop by 59%. The correlation is it's consistent and it's really powerful. But it's not all about stopping negative things. The flip side is just as dramatic. That same power of 4 habit is also linked to a huge increase in positive, proactive faith activities. It's like it flips a switch from what not to do to what to do. So, for instance, what are the odds that a person will share their faith with other people? Well, if they're engaging with the Bible 4 or more times a week, those odds are 228% higher. Just wow. Okay, and then there's this number, which is maybe the most staggering one of all. The odds of that same person giving money to their church, they increase by a massive 416%. That suggests a really deep connection between regularly getting into the text and, well, a person's generosity and core motivation. Now you might be thinking, is this just some small survey? And the answer is a definite no. This data is incredibly robust. We're talking about 8 years of research from the Center for Bible Engagement, and it covers over 100,000 people from all around the world. So yeah, that scale gives these numbers some serious weight. All right, so we've seen the impact. But let's get back to that rebound. Who exactly is reading? When you dive into the demographics, the picture gets really complex and, honestly, a little counterintuitive. So if we break down the population by who fits that Bible-engaged category, a pretty clear pattern emerges. Research shows that 29% of African American adults fall into this group, and that's significantly higher than the 17% of white adults or the 15% of Hispanic adults. But hold on, we have to be a little careful here. Just counting how often someone reads the Bible at home, well, it can be a bit misleading. Engagement is way more nuanced than just that one number. Take Catholics, for example. If you just looked at their personal at-home reading stats, you might think they're less engaged. But as the researchers themselves point out, it's probably more accurate to say they just engaged differently. I mean, hearing scripture read aloud during Mass is a huge part of their practice. That's a really powerful form of engagement that a simple survey about home reading is probably going to miss.
So this brings us to a big question. If the data points to all these positive outcomes and millions of people actually say they want to read the Bible, why don't more people do it? What's creating this gap between wanting to do it and actually doing it?
Well, researchers have found a few really common reasons. For a lot of people, there's a big intimidation factor. I mean, it's a huge book, and that can be daunting. Other people worry that it's just too difficult to understand or that it's too culturally and historically distant, like you need a special degree to get it. And then there's a fear of accountability, this idea that if you read it, you'll feel this moral obligation you're not ready for. And let's be real, for pretty much everyone, there's just the simple fact of distraction and not having enough time. That's a massive hurdle.
So the big question then is what can actually bridge that gap? What helps someone go from just being curious to having that kind of consistent, meaningful engagement we've been talking about? So where does all this go from here? What's the future look like? Well, researchers are now focusing on one specific and absolutely massive group of people they think holds the key. They've given them a name, the movable middle. And this is not some small niche group. We are talking about 71 million Americans. These are folks who are curious about the Bible, but they're also kind of uncertain, maybe a little hesitant. They're not against it, but they're not really engaged with it either. They are, in a very real sense, the potential next wave. So when you step back and look at it all, we're at a really fascinating moment. After years and years of decline, something is definitely stirring. And as this huge, diverse group of 71 million curious people starts to explore this ancient text for themselves, maybe the biggest question isn't just what they'll find inside its pages, but what new story they will end up writing for its future.